The Clone Wars devastated the galaxy on a scale not seen since the end of the New Sith Wars. Devastation that Star Wars material set in that time period does a fairly good job of conveying. But despite this, some of the darkest Battlefronts are rarely mentioned and are lesser known among fans. This is honestly to be expected. For the most part, they originated in the more obscure EU works, and the sheer volume of Clone Wars era material means obscure EU works get buried even deeper than usual. In this video, we plan to shed some light on some of these lesser known campaigns and battles.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
If you've been watching the channel for a while, you're probably familiar with quite a few of the Clone Wars' darker, bloodier battles. Most fans are at least vaguely familiar with the Battle of Jabim, in which the Republic lost thousands of troops and nearly 30 Jedi in a brutal failure of a campaign against separatist nationalists. The Battle of Argonar, the Battle of Atrakan, the Battle of Megiddo, the Battle of Drongar, and Operation Dirge's Lance are all pretty well known as well, in all their bloody details. But there are other battlefronts and other campaigns that still end up swept under the rug. First off, it's important to remember the true scale and nature of the Clone Wars. This was no small rebellion against an overwhelming enemy force. The Galactic Republic and the Confederacy of Independent Systems controlled 100,000 systems between them, and every single one of them contributed to the conflict in some manner or other. The patchwork nature of the Confederacy's territory complicated this even further. There were around a dozen enclaves of separatist space at the height of the Confederacy's power, with 3 of them consisting of massive swaths in the rim. As a result, at any given moment during the Clone Wars, there were hundreds of battles occurring simultaneously, most of which were back and forth struggles that resulted in little territorial gain. If the near fruitlessness of these battles didn't make them dark enough already, what most certainly does is who was fighting them. Prior to the Clone Wars, the Republic was kept primarily safe militarily through the efforts of the planetary security forces, local sector-based militaries with their own natural-born recruited soldiers and their own navies. When war broke out, those PSFs in loyalist space were reorganized under the Grand Army of the Republic, while separatist PSFs acted in conjunction with droid armies of the Confederacy, though that relationship was a little bit more loose. A whole lot of battles in the Clone Wars were fought between the PSFs without any clones or droids involved at all. In several battles, they were even fought between different elements of the same PSF, with one side sporting hastily repainted gear to match their new allegiances, fighting their former brothers in arms in battles that wouldn't even make the footnotes of history texts. Thousands of battles over the course of the Clone Wars were fought purely by natural-born soldiers who fought and died in many cases for no reason at all, as the PSF-heavy skirmishes rarely resulted in major territorial gains, as we stated earlier. Of course, that's not to say that all local conflicts remained local. Many a PSF found itself being reinforced by the Grand Army of the Republic or CIS military during the war, and many local theaters saw heavy central involvement due to the strategic importance of those regions. Those were actually among the bloodiest theaters and battles of the Clone Wars, especially those that brought whole sectors into a state of civil war. The Sluai sector, for example, was a highly volatile region for most of the Clone Wars. That sector, and many systems in adjoining sectors, seceded around the start of the conflict due to local economic pressures, but separatist sentiment was by no means universal in the sector. The Sluai sector was starkly divided between radical loyalist and separatist groups, and they wasted no time in going right for each other's throats when the war started. The Sluai sector was embroiled in a constant state of bloody civil war for the entirety of the conflict. The bloody nature of this conflict was intensified when both the Grand Army of the Republic and the CIS military got involved in the region. The Sluai sector, after all, had many mineral-rich worlds and processing hubs, which were crucial to the Confederacy's war efforts in that entire theater of space. The sector's capital, Sluisvan, was one of the Confederacy's most important shipyards, and the CIS had a vested interest in the other major worlds in the sector, like Denab and Bfash. But the Republic had concerns of its own here. Praesitlin, a crucial loyalist world that was home to a state-of-the-art communications center, was also located in this sector. As a result, both sides were heavily invested in campaigns in this region for most of the war. Battles were fought in this sector at Orto and Agora, as well as Praesitlin. The Battle of Praesitlin was one of the most important battles of the entire war, involving several massive separatist armies that were only defeated thanks to the efforts of Anakin Skywalker. But the conflict in the Sluis sector was bloodier than normal, not just because of the involvement of central forces, but also more brutal local groups. Separatist forces in the Sluis sector were plagued by a small privateer military called the Sons and Daughters of Freedom, a radical loyalist group led by pirate Zosrider Slake. Slake and his troops had defected from the PSFs because they believed the Republic wasn't doing enough to fight the Confederacy, and so they decided to do it themselves. Their campaigns threw the entire sector into chaos, and the response they provoked was even more brutal. The Sons and Daughters of Freedom radicalized the Jedi of a small enclave on Bafash, which set out to stop them and fell to the dark side in the process. The Bafashi Dark Jedi cut a swath through the sector until Yoda put a stop to their insurrection. A similar story played out in Andoan space, though this one might be a bit more known for regular viewers, as we've touched on it before. Andoan space, years earlier, had seen war between the Spivarelda government and the rebellious Andoan free colonies, only for the Republic to separate the two sides and leave them stew in their bitterness and hatred. The Spivarelda seceded and joined the CIS almost immediately after the Raxus Address, but the free colonies sided with the Republic, and when the Clone Wars broke out, the conflict between the two became yet another part of the intensifying galactic war. The result was even more chaos than was seen in the Sluis sector. Andoan space, though officially separatist territory, was incredibly porous for most of the Clone Wars, until the Republic finally reconquered it at the end of 20 BBY. And the reignited civil war was incredibly bloody too, as the free colonists and supporters of the Spivarelda had come to hate each other bitterly in the 40 years since the forced end of the Andoan Wars. Ultimately, the Republic propelled the free colonies to victory, dismantling the Spivarelda and driving the Confederacy into the cloak of the Sith. It should be noted that, despite their victories, the free colonies never got to rule Andoan space. The Republic put the region, which was still full of separatist privateers, under temporary military purview, and when the Republic became the Empire, this became permanent. Ironically enough, this was all it took to reunite the two sides that had formerly been bitter enemies, and former separatists and loyalists alike in Andoan space fought against the Empire during the reconquest of the Rim. Speaking of local conflicts that became part of larger Clone Wars theaters, we would be amiss if we didn't mention the conflict between the Quarren and the Mon Calamari. Most Clone Wars fans are familiar with this conflict, but there are darker depths to it than many fans would know. The Mon Calamari and the Quarren had hated each other ever since they discovered each other, and for them, the Clone Wars was just another excuse to kill each other. The Mon Calamari sided with the Republic and the Quarren with the Confederacy. The result was two battles on Dak, the species' shared homeworld, which ultimately saw the Quarren separatists driven off. But the Quarren weren't ready to admit defeat. They spent the rest of the Clone Wars cranking out warship after warship for the CIS Navy from shipyards on Pamant and Mintuine, which resulted in the destruction of the entire Pamant colony when, during a battle over the world, a Republic battleship suffered a hyperdrive malfunction and slammed into the planet, fracturing its crust. After the Clone Wars, the vengeful Quarren sought to make things even with the Mon Calamari when they sought to resist the Imperial takeover by deactivating the planet's shield, allowing Imperial forces to land and subject the planet to nearly 2 decades of slavery. Speaking of species rivalries, the Clone Wars flared up the ancient hatred between the Wookiees of Kashyyyk and the Trandoshans of Trandosha. Kashyyyk, which was well aware that it was almost entirely encircled by separatist space, remained more or less neutral at first, loyal to the Republic but hesitant to commit geopolitical suicide. The Trandoshans, however, had no such qualms. They allied with the Confederacy and began waging a private war of their own against the Wookiees, taking them as slaves and attacking Republic warships to steal supplies to trade to the CIS for droid reinforcements. The Trandoshans were involved on Kashyyyk long before General Grievous began a full-scale invasion of the world at the end of the conflict, raiding small bands of Wookiees deep in the planet's Shadowland jungles, taking slaves, or just killing them outright. The Confederacy backed them up, as by this point, the Wookiees had more or less openly sided with the Republic, and they knew that Kashyyyk was the key to a whole swath of the Mid-Rim. The Wookiees, of course, fought back with the kind of brutality you would expect from the Wookiees, and neither side gave the other any quarter. This conflict didn't end until after the Clone Wars, when the Empire enslaved Kashyyyk itself, and made deals with the Trandoshans over slaving. So those were some of the darker, more unknown Clone Wars battlefronts that you might not have heard of. Do you know of any others? Feel free to post your thoughts in the comments section below, and we could do a part 2 of this if you guys enjoy. So make sure you hit that like button to show me you want a part 2. Anyways guys, just before you go, as per usual, make sure you check out all those juicy links in the description below if you want to chat with other Star Wars fans on our Discord, play some Star Wars games with other Star Wars fans on our Geetsly's gaming network, and if you are into history, watch some of my history videos on my second channel. We post high quality videos once a week there, so I'm sure some of you history buffs will really enjoy that. As always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.